All right, guys, happy Saturday and welcome in to the Alabama Pregame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Simone Eli. It's week 10 of the college football season. It's the first week of November. It's chilly outside. So many stakes, high stakes throughout all of the SEC and all of college football right now. But it's just that part of the year where every single game matters so much. Tonight, Alabama hosts LSU. Not exactly the LSU of 2019 like we saw a couple of years ago. We'll get to all of that in just a second. But nonetheless, Matt, a game that matters a lot to a lot of people.
For sure. I would say there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in this game for sure on both sides. I think I was talking to somebody about this morning about the feel going into this game. Mm-hmm. And even though I think we've learned our lesson about declaring Alabama an automatic win over anybody this season after that Texas A&M game, the vibe I'm getting going into this game reminds me a little bit of those Iron Bowls in 2008, 2012, where Alabama was kind of had some real leftover grudge energy going into the game. I think 2008 is really a good comparison because Alabama was coming off of a long streak of losing to Auburn. They were sick and tired of it. They finally knew for sure they were the better team going into the game. And even though the opponent had kind of already been humbled at that point, it was like there was this sense of, hey, look, nobody comes into our place and treats us like that and gets away with it. And I think you saw them kind of unleash a little bit in that game. And I think based on Saban's comments this week, I think he senses that there's a little bit of that energy too. You've heard him talk a few times about their memories of that 2019 game against LSU and Bryant Denny and how it's really stuck with these guys. I think there's a sense that this, there's the old expression about not kicking somebody when they're down, and that doesn't really apply in the SEC.
No, it certainly does not. There's no love lost when it comes to these two teams. The history of this rivalry game really feels like every single team in the SEC feels like Alabama is their rival. Alabama really only feels like certain teams are their rival, but I would put LSU somewhere in the category of it being a rival. All right, guys, if you're just tuning in, it's the Alabama Pregame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. The second-ranked Tide hosts LSU. Before we really dive into that game, let's talk about a couple of things that are significant when it comes to this week. One, Alabama's coming off of the bye week, so guys getting healthy. That's a big deal, just kind of bouncing back, things of that nature. And second is Alabama is second in the college football playoff rankings, a significant thing, of course, for the Tide when it comes to just what things look like down the road, Matt. I'm not really surprised Alabama was there. That's exactly where I had them. That's where the committee has them. Your thoughts before we dive into the game on Bama being second in the college football playoff?
Well, I think you have to approach it understanding that the rankings mean this is what we think today. We are not looking ahead. We're not predicting anything that's going to happen in the future. And that's important to realize because ultimately, right, Alabama is, if they're going to get into the playoffs, if they are going to win a national championship, they're going to have to beat Georgia. And Georgia right now is ranked number 1, and Alabama already has a loss. So to me, I think just because Alabama and Georgia are ranked number 1 and number 2 right now doesn't mean that means both of them are getting into the playoff no matter what happens, as long as they keep winning until that SEC title game. I think to me, it says that Alabama has a lot more on the line than Georgia does, for example. I think Georgia is undefeated in number 1. To me, that says even if they lose to Alabama in Atlanta, they're probably still getting into the playoffs. Alabama's in a different situation. They have a loss, and I think getting a second loss and looking at the other teams behind them right now, there's quite a few undefeated teams. There's quite a few really good one-loss teams that have a chance to win their Power 5 conference. I don't think Alabama should feel safe or secure at all about their playoff chances. I think they need to operate as if no matter where we're ranked, if we lose again, we're not making the playoffs and it's all over.
Yes, I think there's no question. Nick Saban knows that. He uses the term a lot, being remembered in November, a November to remember. I mean, whatever phrase you want to call it. And a big part of that is mental toughness, being this late in the year and keeping your consistency up, not getting complacent, but knowing that every single game, every single play matters. Here's what Saban had to say this week about that exact topic.
Well, this is November, all right, so it's important to start it the right way. Play one play at a time, one game at a time, one quarter at a time, one team at a time, and be able to maintain your ability to stay focused so that you continue to improve as a team. And, you know, from my perspective, I don't want to wear the players out so that our explosive movement and our speed is going in the wrong direction through a long season. So, we want to make sure that, we're sort of going in this direction physically, but keeping the right mental frame of mind, psychological disposition to work and practice. One of the things that has been pretty obvious is the guys that practice well, they end up playing well.
Psychological disposition. If that was not a Nick Saban comment in the month of November, I don't know what is, but that is part of what his song and dance every single year when it comes to this time in year is where are guys mentally, mental toughness, and really sticking with each game, each play, week in and week out, Matt.
Yeah, it is, I think, what separates championship teams from just pretty good, talented teams who don't live up to their potential is how you play this month. And Alabama has had, look, if you go back for the last 10, 12 years, Alabama's been the most talented team on any field they've been on every single week. And the only time that it's mattered is when everybody's actually playing well, healthy. And we know that Alabama hasn't won every single national championship for the last 10 to 12 years. They don't always pull it off. And I think November is when you see the difference happen. Those championship teams find a way to get it done in November, sometimes through some really tough games that they have to gut out until the very end. And I think, staying healthy is a part of it. Yeah, having some good luck is part of it too. But I think mental toughness is a thing that Saban always really emphasizes and says, this is really about not letting up. It's about not letting the grind of the season get to you. And we'll see. We'll see starting today if this team has that mental makeup to get through this final month of the season.
Yeah, let's talk some numbers. Alabama's a 28.5-point favorite. That's 4 touchdowns by my math. I don't know about y'all's math, but that's pretty significant. A big part of that, probably the offensive output that we have seen from Alabama. The Tide absolutely rolling offensively. Look at some of the numbers right here. Bama averaging nearly 46 points per game, almost 500 total yards. There's no question that they have separated themselves, Matt. A huge part of that has been, of course, the play of Bryce Young, who on the year has thrown 26 touchdowns and just 3 interceptions. And we know that some of those interceptions, at least one I can remember, I want to say 2 were not his fault necessarily. It's just kind of a misfortune situation. But Bryce Young's decision-making, I mean, can we even talk enough about it? I don't think we can.
I mean, statistically, one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the country, one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the country too. I think those are stats that don't necessarily make the first page of the stat books. They don't put that stuff up on the main little stat page on ESPN after the game. So they're not the traditional stats that jump out to people, but they're extremely important to this offense. Alabama does not, even when they're not scoring, even when things aren't all clicking on all cylinders for this offense, they don't make a lot of terrible mistakes. They're not throwing away possessions. Are they still getting as much out of every single possession as they could? No, definitely not. And we've talked about that before and seen some of that this offense has a lot of room to improve still. But Bryce Young, I think one of the big strengths of this team is Bryce Young makes it count when he drops back to pass, and he's not making a lot of inaccurate passes. The downfield stuff isn't there yet. He's a young quarterback. He's probably still working on his feel for those kinds of things. But what we're seeing from him so far, those smart, I don't want to call them easy, but those smart throws that are high percentage gainers for Alabama, he's been on the money with that stuff. His receivers have been very reliable for him. That they have not been able to create the big explosive plays that sort of defined this offense a year ago. Sure. But for the most part, not playing dumb, lazy, sort of sloppy football offensively. This is a team that takes care of the ball.
Yes, and speaking of that, it's really a combined effort in the air and on the ground. And this week, AL.com's Mike Casagrande asked Nick Saban, what goes into the thought process when it comes to deciding, okay, are we going to run the ball? Are we going to pass the ball? Obviously, there's guys like Brian Robinson Jr., Roy Dell Williams, we've seen at times, just really, really ground and pound. And a lot of fans get frustrated at times with the decision-making, but at the end of the day, it's more of a take what the defense gives you type of approach. Here's what Saban had to say.
I don't know that I really define it. I think you really do what you have to do to move the ball and win the game. Some people play to stop the run. They play extra guys in the box. So there's more opportunities in the passing game. So you don't want to, try to beat your head up against the wall. So you say, okay, we rushed for over 150 yards today. Other teams are more split safety oriented, give you more opportunities to run it. So maybe in those games you run it for a little more, pass it for a little less. But I think the number one thing you want to do is take advantage of what the defense gives you.
So, it sounds pretty obvious that would be the mindset. Sometimes it seems frustrating when it comes to, okay, what is Bill O'Brien doing in the red zone? What's decision making here, Matt? But ultimately, Nick Saban knows what he's doing. So does Bill O'Brien. So does this offense. And they really are. That's one of the things that impresses me every single week is that Alabama is able to expose what the opponent is kind of their weakest points defensively.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the things you hear from opposing coaches whenever we get to talk to them about Alabama over the years is that's why it's so hard to game plan against them and beat them, because you can't say, here's the one thing they're good at and let's take it away from them. Alabama can beat you many different ways. They can almost become a different type of team week to week if they need to, depending on what their opponent's strengths and weaknesses are. And that's the advantage of having so much talent like Alabama has. But I think, if we want to talk about LSU specifically and taking what the defense gives you, first of all, this is a team that has been absolutely obliterated by injuries, probably as bad as anybody in the SEC this year. They have lost some All-American level defensive backs. So I think this is going to be a big opportunity for Bryce Young and those wide receivers to make some big plays today. They're a team that has lost over the season from time to time, have been without some of their key defensive linemen, although they've gotten some of those guys back. So we'll see. We'll see what they're able to do up front. As far as Alabama's offensive line and creating space for that running game. I think Alabama would always prefer to be able to effectively run the ball and control the clock and keep the ball away from the other team, keep their defense on the sideline. But you got to do what you got to do. You got to take the points where they're going to come. And I think there's going to be opportunities for the Alabama passing game, perhaps on the deeper end today. This might be the day that Bryce Young sort of has to answer the bell and hit some of those deeper routes that he's struggled with in terms of accuracy this year. But yeah, I think there are going to be teams that face Alabama at some point before this season is over where there are not glaring weaknesses defensively. But I think LSU has some pretty wide open holes right now, and we've seen the last couple of opponents be able to take advantage of that.
No question. Should be noted LSU is also coming off of the bye week. Matt, this LSU team is so bizarre to me. There are situations with injuries, situations with guys leaving the program, all the drama surrounding the team. Ed Ogeron, obviously, in his last few weeks with LSU. What are they playing for at this rate? Because a lot of folks would say you just mail it in, you roll on, you go back to Baton Rouge, but look at this game. In my opinion, players look at this game as an opportunity as kind of a send-off maybe for Orgeron, or just kind of a gold star on the season, that if somehow, some way, we could even make it close in the end, pull something out crazy in Tuscaloosa, how meaningful that would be to a team that really doesn't have a lot else.
Yeah, and look, I don't know that internally, I don't know how those guys feel about it at Orgeron. Maybe they're ready for the change. But regardless of playing for their coach or not, I think it's been very clear that the last several years, maybe longer than that, at LSU, part of the mentality that they recruit players with at LSU is come here and help us beat Bama. It is it is more than probably anywhere, maybe even more than Auburn, I would say. It is a part of that program's identity to try to beat Alabama. I think it is in that fan base's head. I think it is from the ground up there. There is a level of, I'm not to psychoanalyze them too much, but I think that there's some insecurity about the fact that the guy who helped build everything there into what it is now at another school, and he's beating their brains out every year. He has pushed them into obscurity for a decade. I think that has become a big part of their identity at LSU is we build our program to beat Alabama. And so it's been drilled into those players. I think regardless of how they feel about Orgeron, they know this is the biggest stage they're going to play on all year. They know this is their biggest chance to, create a legacy for themselves with their fans and their program. They know how much it would mean to be able to pull this off today. So if they're going to give 110% effort at all this year, this is the week they're going to do it.
Yeah, there's no question about that. LSU fans, all of LSU understands. It's kind of like if you break up with your girlfriend and she moves on and she starts thriving, not only quickly, but like for the rest of what seems like her life without you. That's kind of how LSU fans feel about
it. I'd add into that, if there was some way that somehow you're not allowed to get married until your ex gets divorced again or something. There's this other layer of complication to it where they can't move on from Saban. They can't just wish him well and say, hey, look, you go do what you got to do and we'll do what because now he's directly standing in the way of their success. So it's been tough. You can tell that this one is painful for them, I think, every year.
Oh, yes, no doubt. And a couple of years ago, they had that moment of hope. Things went well for a moment, and now it's just back to the same old, same old. But all right, we're going to stop breaking down the relationship psychology, although I really did just enjoy that a lot. Guys, before we let you go, around the rest of the SEC right now, Matt, obviously Alabama looking to stay atop the SEC West, and looking around the SEC, the big one today is Auburn and Texas A&M. The Tigers trying to stay relevant when it comes to making that Iron Bowl a game that matters. Right now, Georgia finally putting some points on Missouri. That was a very bizarre start to that game. But a lot of fans, before they tune in to the Tide at 6, will have their eyes on College Station and the implications that it has on Alabama kind of moving forward in the rest of November.
Huge game. Alabama fans will be watching this one, I have no doubt. Like you said, Simone, huge implications because the winner of that Auburn-Texas A&M game is really – that becomes the main threat to Alabama going forward. Now, obviously, Auburn is a more direct threat because if they beat Alabama, they would then win the West themselves. But if Texas A&M wins this game today – they're sitting there basically licking their chops, waiting for Alabama to slip up and make one more mistake, because then it would give them the tiebreaker to win the SEC West. And obviously that's something that Texas A&M has not done yet in their program's history. So this is a very consequential game. Alabama fans need to pay attention to this one for sure.
Yes, it certainly is. As Nick Saban said early in our show, you're remembered in November. November to remember, however you want to say it. It's important right now. This is the first week of November, the final stretch as Alabama is coming off of the bye week. But kickoff set for 6 o'clock on ESPN. If you're headed to the game, if you're already over there in College Station, in Tuscaloosa, enjoy it, guys. It's going to be a good one, a night game again for Alabama. I know fans love the night games there in Tuscaloosa, the light show. all the things. But you guys enjoy it and stay safe. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Alabama Pregame Show, brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. For Matt Scalisi, I'm Simone Eli. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.